Joon, welcome to Real Vision.
Thanks for having me, Ash.
It's a pleasure to have you here. You and I were just talking a little bit off camera. We were both early alumni of CoinDesk. You, in fact, even far earlier than I was. Tell us a little bit about your story, your journey into the crypto space.
It's starting to sound a little bit like ancient history, given how quickly the space moves, as I'm sure you're well aware. But I got started back in 2013. I'm based in London. And, I had just moved to London in 2012. I was doing my master's degree at Goldsmiths. It's nothing to do with crypto. It was kind of a art meets philosophy kind of degree. Anyway, the long and short of it was there was this website that had popped up at the time covering, at the time, just Bitcoin. And this Bitcoin thing was just, it was making waves. It was increasing in value at a very rapid pace. It went up to 100, from 10 to $100, and people were taking notice. And then it was climbing beyond that. And I remember I was thinking, well, this seems like a really interesting a story to cover. My background is journalism. I studied journalism. I was a journalist for many years. And so I was like, how do I get involved in this? And lo and behold, a website called CoinDesk was covering this thing exclusively, day in and day out. So I got in touch with them. It turns out and they had just started at the time, 2013. It turns out I had run into the founder before in Shanghai. So I used to live in Shanghai. I was a journalist there for several years. I had run into the founder, who's a gentleman named Shakil Khan, who goes by Shaq. He's a pretty well-known angel investor and in Europe and today globally. He was one of the first people to invest in Spotify. He backed Spotify way back in the day, and he really helped to grow that business into the kind of behemoth that it is today. So we had crossed paths in Shanghai in the mid 2000s when he moved over to Shanghai seeking sort of, I think, his second fortune. He had already done very well, and he was looking for sort of, new opportunities. And we crossed paths because I was back then, there was a thing called webblogging, which was an esoteric new activity that people interested in technology did. So I was part of this group, this mailing list called Shanghai Webloggers. Jack showed up on that list. We met up, chit-chatted, and that was that. And fast forward sort of almost 10 years later, I run into him in London, Oxford Circus, at the CoinDesk office. And so I started out freelancing for them and eventually joined them on staff. But that's really how I got into this whole crypto sort of rabbit hole. It was this growing interest around Bitcoin in the media back then, and that was really my entryway, covering Bitcoin as a journalist.
So you were definitely one of the CoinDesk OGs. I didn't even realize that CoinDesk was founded originally in Oxford. And it's incredibly interesting, I think, not just for us because we worked there, but also because, the early history of CoinDesk is really in many ways the way that many people who were early in the space really learned about what was happening in Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it says something about media business models, right? It's like, I think there's been a lot of hand wringing in the last, let's say, 20 years about, well, how does media make money, right? The internet has destroyed the business model. And really, I think it's relatively simple when you think about it, right? When there's a demand for new information, that's when the premium that media can charge is the highest. And nowhere is this more clearly illustrated than in cryptocurrency coverage. CoinDesk was started in 2013. Bitcoin back then was sub $100, and subsequently went on to break all the records, as we know. And people keep coming to CoinDesk, right? The traffic keeps flowing because the space keeps changing, and people need to know this new information. So it's really like a great story of finding a niche and covering it sort of relentlessly. To serve that niche's sort of information needs.
Yeah. So you mentioned the constant rate and accelerating rate even of change in the Bitcoin space, in the cryptocurrency space. Talk a little bit about the evolution that you've seen from, pre-2013 to the present, and why it's significant right now to investors and people who are interested in this space?
One of the things I did at CoinDesk, so I was a journalist at the start, and by the end, I left in 2015. I went to Quartz, where I was their technology correspondent. In 2015, I built the CoinDesk event business, right, which is a conference called Consensus, which today is sort of the main gathering point of the industry. And I think looking at it through the consensus agenda, the speakers and the audience is one great way to understand the growth of this industry. Because the first consensus, we had 600 people. This was the year 2015. Bitcoin fell to about $400, I think, from 1,200. So things were pretty serious that year. People were really thinking like, this thing's done. Like we've seen it boom, the bubble has popped, right? We could all go back to business as usual. But consensus really marked a turning point because we managed to get Citi on board, the bank, and this was the first time a major bank had really been publicly associated with this technology. So they sponsored the event in sort of the depths of that crypto winter. And we had a really diverse cast of people show up, many of whom had not been in the same room together, right? So we had a young Vitalik, well, he's still young now, but we had a young Vitalik Buterin. We had Greg Maxwell. We had Mike Hearn, all Bitcoin Core developers and apostates at the time. We had Katie Hawn, when she was still at the DOJ, come and talk about how the government had used blockchain evidence in the various associated Silk Road trials. And we had all these banks and consultancies or EYs and so on come. So this was a really diverse group of people who were involved in the industry, many of whom today, are sort of crypto celebrities. And then as the years went by, you saw this group of people expand. It became more and more diverse, right? One year you'd meet somebody from Toyota. The next year you'd meet somebody from, the European Commission. It was just more and more people getting pulled into this industry, doing work or having to keep up with it. And so I think that's one of the sort of clearest ways that you see this kind of growth. It's just people from all corners of the business world getting sucked in with every successive edition of Consensus.
I'm so curious that, having seen that and having been there kind of present at the creation of Bitcoin as a mass market, mass audience notion, I'm curious, how have you seen it change? How have you seen it evolve? And what does it suggest to you about the direction it may be headed in the future?
Absolutely. I think it's funny because each time you have one of these great price rallies, right, it breaks into the kind of mainstream consciousness. And then the prices go down and it sort of fades away for a while. So you can think of it a little bit like, it's almost like tides, right? Each time the tide goes up, it leaves behind some silt. The tide goes down, and you sort of forget about the incoming water, and then inevitably the tide comes back, right? And yet more silt is deposited. So it's a bit like that, it's a bit of a sort of natural process like that, where each time you build up these layers of understanding, new people who are interested in technology, new people who want to build things with this technology. And over time, you just develop a much bigger sort of universe of people who are involved in it. And I think you see it today for example, in a microcosm like the NFT world, right? Now you have projects like Bored Ape Yacht Club that are comprised of former investors of Zed Run and Top Shot, right, which are other NFT projects. They all aped into Bored Ape Yacht Club. And now they're doing various spin-offs within Bored Ape Yacht Club that are composable with metaverse NFT projects like Sandbox. So now you're starting to have this reflexive thing where there's enough people in the ecosystem that they can play off each other and build new things together.
Hey, if you like this clip, be sure to check out the full interview and more only on realvision.com/crypto. It's 100% free. Sign up now.